Hello, listeners. Welcome back. You are listening to episode Student Initiative podcast dedicated to Philippine nature and wildlife. Each week, an expert from the respective field will discuss and give insights on biodiversity and environmental protection. I'm Kayla Tiangco and with me is Zaray Buena. We will be your hosts for today's episode.
Before we begin, let's have a short recap of what we have discussed in the previous episode. Kayla, what do you remember about what we shared last week?
Hmm. In the first episode on the Quirino Protected Landscape, we had Forester Ray Paso Gutierrez, the superintendent of PAMO, with us. If I'm not mistaken, he mentioned how there are still problems on land conversion and the overlapping of tenured areas despite the efforts of PAMO. He also mentioned the NGP and ENGP, a project that aims to work with the rural community, the contribution of students like those from Quirino State University, and of course, their future plans on ecotourism sites. Am I right or have I missed anything?
I agree, no? Basically, on the first episode, we had the very context of what we are trying to do here, no? The background of QPL as well as the current projects as well as the initiatives of the LGU and the NGO. So, I therefore conclude that we really had a fruitful discussion in the previous episode. So, guys, if you haven't listened to it yet, please don't miss your chance. Our first episode can be found in the podcast and on our YouTube channel, Project Kaligkasan. Let's now move on to today's topic on the impact of NGOs or non-governmental organizations on biodiversity and environmental protection.
Project Kaligkasan is in partnership with UP Association of Biology Majors and is brought to you by the Ateneo Environmental Science Society. All right. Ayan na, ready na ba kayo? It's now time to get some deeper insights from our special guest from Philippine Parks and Biodiversity, Miss Nella Lomotan.
Ms. Nella Lomotan is the founder of Eco Explorations, a social and environmental enterprise focused on biodiversity conservation and socioeconomic impact for grassroots communities through sustainable tourism, science-based education, and citizen engagement. She is also a co-founder and the managing director of Philippine Parks and Biodiversity, the NGO partner of Eco Explorations, focused on the sustainable development of parks and protected areas and the restoration of ecosystems in the Philippines. In 2020, she was one of the 25 global finalists for the Landscape Heroes Award by the Global Landscapes Forum. Currently, she is also a consultant for the Biodiversity Finance Initiative project of the United Nations Development Program and the Department of Environment and Natural Resources in the Philippines. She is also one of the 2021 Climate Ambassadors by the Global Climate Youth Network, devised by World Bank Young Professionals, and is part of the World Urban Parks Asia Pacific Committee. She holds a certificate in sustainable tourism from the Global Sustainable Tourism Council and is currently undertaking the world's first climate friendly travel diploma from the Institute of Tourism Studies in Europe under the SUNX program to supplement studies.
Before we start with the questions and digging deeper into the issues and the NGOs, I would like to ask you po, ma'am, about what is PH Parks and Biodiversity and what do you do? Let's let the listeners know about your NGO po.
Mhm. Yeah, so thanks again for having us, for having me in this podcast or this interview. Basically, PH Parks and Biodiversity, we're a nonprofit NGO. Our mission is to conserve Philippine biodiversity through the sustainable development of parks, protected areas, and the restoration of ecosystems and landscapes. So we adopt a multi-stakeholder approach to conservation where we work with the citizens, academe, government, other civil society members, and the general public to address our goals in conservation and largely also the local grassroots communities, primarily the forest and wildlife rangers as well as the indigenous members of these communities. So grateful to be here today.
So I'm amazed that you have a lot of connections po in this NGO. Like you mentioned po, the academe, the LGUs, and maybe and even other NGOs and the grassroots community. Can you please expound on that? Like, are there any instances or projects where you really work together? As
Mhm. Yes. So conservation can't be done in silo. So example, let's say we take one of the protected areas, right? To be able to identify the species in the area, to know how to conserve them, then you need to work with science-based experts, right? Researchers, biologists. So because of that data, that's where you can come up with solutions. Then you also need to work with foresters. If you're involved in, let's say, forest restoration, which we are in some areas. Then you need to also work with the private sector because as an NGO, you need to get funding from the private sector, right, for their social responsibility. And then, of course, the government because that's technically the land that they steward. And we're just technically given rights to help develop those areas for primarily for conservation. So it really has to be a multi-stakeholder approach where everyone has a part to play. Otherwise, conservation will not be as effective.
so to give you po a little background, our episode last week was about the QPL. And just to connect it, do you have any projects in the QPL? Or if not,
No.
no, that's
Mm-mm.
perfectly fine. But what are the places or the parks where all your work goes into?
Mhm. So one of our long-standing partners is Mount Iglit Bacos, primarily the Tamarao Conservation Program. So we've been engaging with the rangers there in the TCP to provide conservation solutions and actions for the protection of the critically endangered Tamarao. We also have Ipa Watershed that's near in Sierra Madre near Metro Manila actually, which supplies our water, and we've adopted from the government a national greening program site for the restoration of forests in the area. And so we also have other PA partners such as Apo Reef Natural Park, which is a marine protected area. And it's also, as mentioned earlier, we focus a lot on rangers and the community. So what we're doing there is more of program support to provide the needs of the rangers to do their jobs well. Currently we're looking into equipment for proper turtle identification and tagging in the marine protected area. So it varies, but currently we really want to focus on where we are already present because there's already so much that needs to be done. We're not trying to do many things all at once. It's really focusing on our existing efforts and really being good at it and having maximum impact.
So, ang dami po palang species na
Mhm.
cover nyo po. Could you share po what are the state of these species?
If you
Mhm.
could go to the specifics din po, like yung mga specific species, that will be good.
Yeah, example, the tamaral, it's a critically endangered animal that can only be found in Mindoro. And so one of the things that needs to be done is in situ conservation because there's only about 600 plus left in the wild, which is a very small population. When you say in situ conservation, it means conserving that species in its natural habitat. So as mentioned, we really utilize our ranger programs and strengthen that, our support for habitat protection to continue to conserve these species. So it's also the same with what we're doing in Apo Reef. And also in Ipo Watershed, it's native tree species specifically. So we're actually propagating endangered species of trees for reforestation. So it varies, of course, in terms of species of trees. Why do we need to do that? Because of the deforestation in the past decade, right? In the past years.
Yes.
So that's something that we need to do.
Thank you po. Kanina po, di ba, you've mentioned a lot of times na you've partnered with the rangers, with the LGUs, the foresters. So, do you have some examples of other NGOs naman po that you have partnered with your projects?
Mm-mm. So we also partner with kunwari, let's say the EDC, the Energy Development Corporation. So they are one of the pioneers in restoration. And then we also have the Forest Foundation, which is also a body that supports different forest restoration work. We have a lot of NGO partners. Other NGO partners provide support for financing, like for the future, Kids for Kids. These are youth groups. It's very varied and diverse. It's either some give their support through financing, some through technical knowledge and capacity building.
Thank you po. Another follow-up po for that. So, we noticed na yung mga NGOs na na-partner nyo, technically, hindi lahat sila is very environmental based na, as you said. Some give you financing and everything. So, in general po, what do you think is the general role of NGOs in conservation of biodiversity?
Well, NGOs are there. That's why it's non-governmental organization to technically support the government's mandate, right? In environmental conservation. So these are the mandates. You have national goals to achieve, and NGOs are there to also help in achieving those goals because the government can't do everything. That's the reality. Also with the DNR getting one of the least budget every year, annual budget,
Ad.
right, from the government.
Yeah, that's
So,
true.
so we're here to support each other. Hindi naman tayo pwede umasa lahat sa government for these initiatives because yun nga, they also need public-private sector participation and support. So that's what NGOs are for. And of course, like strengthening and leveraging on partnerships.
Yeah, we thank you for those initiatives, ma'am.
I would like to ask rin po, since you mentioned po ma'am that we need to work together po with the government and those people from the public. How has the setup po affected the work that you're doing this pandemic?
To be honest, tuloy-tuloy pa rin. Hindi kami nahirapan in terms of implementation. I guess sa start, yes, because mas strict last year, right? But forestry and protected area conservation is still a priority area, so we're not limited. Although one of the challenges was because our social enterprise is eco-explorations. So we didn't want to just rely on donations. So we have this sustainable tourism enterprise that funds our conservation needs. So these are the eco tours, eco camps that we have in communities. So kunwari, whatever we collected from the fees in ecotourism, we donated towards conservation. But that's one of the revenue streams that was cut off for our advocacy work kasi walang tourism at the moment, right? So it's been a year. So that's one of the challenging ones. But thankfully, we also got other support in terms of grants, and people continue to help out in this advocacy.
That's very good to hear po.
So we have just really scratched the surface, and until now, even though we just started, I've already learned so much. So we will be right back to discuss more after a short break.
This month, the University of the Philippines Association of Biology Majors, or UPABM, will be launching its donation drive entitled Balik Handog to provide school supplies to scholars from Balara Junior High School. To support our cause, we invite you to join our raffle draw for only 20 pesos per entry and get a chance to be one of 28 winners of vouchers from Clean Canteen. Simply go to tinyurl.com/balikhandog and upload your proof of donation there.
Who says we can't be environmental leaders in the new normal? Together, let's brave new waters with the Ateneo Environmental Science Society, the premier environmental student organization of the Ateneo de Manila University. We are all about protecting the environment, rain or shine. So, what are you waiting for? Check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Ateneo ESS, and together, let's be a #Force for Nature.
Project Kaligkasan is in partnership with UP Association of Biology Majors and is brought to you by the Ateneo Environmental Science Society. So, since nag-discuss na tayo about yung sa current situation ng pandemic po, let's go further naman po and try to foresee kung ano yung plans ng organization sa protection ng biodiversity. So, first question po, do you have any future plans regarding yung conservation or focusing on QPL naman po?
So with that, we don't naman limit ourselves to protected area partners. If there is an opportunity to help and work with QPL, then, if kaya ng resources namin, then we will. Because technically, we're here to support protected area conservation and management. That's our main focus. Pero, with the limitations in resources at present, we need to be realistic and smart about it. Hindi naman
Yes.
kaya na lahat ng protected areas tutulungan all at
Opo.
once. So as mentioned earlier, we're really focusing on our strengths, on our current partnerships, and making sure that we achieve the outcomes that we've set out together.
I'm
Okay.
glad to hear that rin po because based from our previous conversation with Forester Gutierrez, they also have plans on setting up ecotourism sites in QPL, and that sounds like a great opportunity somewhere in the near future that maybe QPL and your NGO may work together.
Yes, definitely. Our ecotourism director was the former DOT chief of Cebu, and he actually was able to win several awards from the United Nations for community-based tourism. So our approach is really focused on communities, pero it helps in the conservation of the area. So if there's an opportunity, you can inform Forester and the QPL team that we'd love to collaborate and strengthen ecotourism for conservation in QPL.
Yes, that's very good to hear po. This question po, we also asked Forrester Gutierrez this, pero I'm gonna ask you din po, no? So, what do you think will be yung situation ng biodiversity in the Philippines na in 5 to 10 years from now?
Well, I'd really like to be in a hopeful state always. So with sectors coming together, it's the decade of ecosystem restoration, this 2021 to 2030. With sectors coming together and becoming more educated and aware of what needs to be done, I'm hopeful that in 5 to 10 years, we can increase the percentage of forests restored, of biodiversity protected, and land protected, and opportunities, most especially for the community and the ranger programs, uplifted and strengthened because our environmental defenders really deserve so much more.
They do. Hopefully, we get there po.
I would like to ask rin po, how does the NGO assess if the project is working? Like if it's really conserving the area and it's helping the biodiversity?
Of course, in terms of that, there's both short-term and long-term. So take, for example, forest protection. So kung kunwari before in your baseline, illegally logged siya ng certain percentage or parang may violations in a month, because of your efforts in conservation, nag-lessen, right? Makikita mo yon. So that's one. And then if you're trying to restore, kunwari, then of course it will be measured in 5 to 10 years by the number of trees that have matured and grown in the area. So it's different. It varies per conservation outcome. Pero syempre titignan mo based on what your initial goals were.
So talaga pong parang may nag-audit po sa lahat ng species doon, no?
Oh, usually that's the work done by NGOs. DNR also sometimes, but yeah, the government and the NGOs are the ones who are spearheading the monitoring. Not really audit, it's more of monitoring and assessment.
Okay. Monitoring and assessment.
So, I think yung pinaka-important naman doon is like, maririnig natin na projects are working talaga. Yung next question po for you, ma'am. So, sabi niyo po kanina, may na-assess naman natin kahit pa paano yung improvement through this project. So, ano po yung sa inyo pong work? Like, ilang years na po ba kayo nag-work as an NGO?
So we've been around only since 2019. Yeah,
Okay.
kasi I was in the CSR field before, handling one of the CSR programs for one of the biggest retail brands. And then I really decided to venture out kasi hindi pwedeng, because conservation is full-time as well as community development.
po.
So we established it in 2019.
So, in that span of 2 years, ano po yung sa tingin niyo or nakita niyo na pinakamalaking change na nangyari? with regards to conservation of biodiversity in the Philippines?
Well, for me, as mentioned, you won't really get a lot of outcomes in 2 years. Because,
Yeah,
di ba,
that's
syempre, inaano mo pa yan. You're laying down the foundation for everything. But for me, yung pinaka-important really in that short span of time is how much we've empowered the rangers that we work with, given them a voice, gave them more programs, help in strengthening their capacity, and also the support that they get. Because as mentioned, sa conservation, sila naman talaga yung important part. You can't say, let's conserve the tamaraw. How are you gonna do that? Who's helping in conservation? That's why very large ang focus namin on the rangers, because they're really the ones on ground who really protects these environments. So without them, these environments and species won't thrive and survive.
yes po. Thank you po for that. So, another question din po. So, since yung sabi niyo po nga kanina na generally NGO is there to support, especially kapag nakikita natin na kulang yung resources ng government. So, can you give us an overview po kung paano po yung communication niyo with the government agencies?
What do you mean an overview?
Like, yung ano lang po, general na paano kayo nag-communicate with the, kunyari, for example, DNR with these issues?
It really varies kasi we have a lot of direct contacts in the DNR. So, yung mga iba, very informal. Lagi kami nag-uusap on Messenger, right? Others, you really need to meet them. Others via email. So, there's not one specific medium of how you converse with them.
All right, thank you po. Kayla, do you have more questions?
Yes, I would like to know rin po if you discuss with the government agencies on like policies. Do you have like suggestions for them because of the fieldwork po that you're doing in the protected landscapes?
Of course, that's something that will really naturally come out of it. So, example, dun sa Tamaraw, we're soon launching a signature campaign with support from the DNR to institutionalize and make the ranger positions permanent. Kasi at present, contractual pa rin sila even after the initial presidential proclamation. So yung mga ganon, and if that policy is passed, then that means magiging regular yung rangers. Hindi sila magkakaroon ng delay in salaries, and they will be supported in terms of funding. So that's just one example. But obviously, we always bring it up where we can, but also we're trying to be very smart nga about our resources and how we manage our time. Because not everything can be done all at once.
That sounds good to hear po that these rangers who dedicate so much of their time are gonna be hopefully in the near future magiging permanent na rin po sila.
Yes. Actually, I would request that if that is finally approved by the DNR, please help us get signatures. I will share that with you.
Po.
Yes po. Feel free
Sure.
to share whatever you want the
We will
listeners.
try to help.
Yeah.
So, other than the rangers po, are there other suggestions that you have on how the country handles its environmental protection and policies?
For me, on our end, we really like to focus on the protection part. And as mentioned, the ranger enforcement, because there's still a lot to work on that. So we're not trying to do everything all at once. As mentioned, you need to prioritize. So for us, one at a time. That's one of the biggest things that we want to improve. Yung policies on ranger enforcement, protection, upping the game of the rangers. So we'll focus on that.
All right po. Thank you so much. I think we're nearing the end po. So, one of the last questions I'd like to ask po is, kanina you mentioned na you focus on the community then. So, let's talk about community involvement po. So, what do you think in general are the people's duty, or like how can they help in environmental protection?
Are you talking about the general public?
Yes po. Like the communities.
Yes. So, like general public, like you guys, or what community? The local community in the area, or kayo as a community?
Hatiin po natin. Sige, we can go with the local community first.
Well, of course, obviously, they need to also be advocates and conservationists themselves, 'di ba? Hindi naman nila pwedeng sinisira yung kalikasan in which they live in. So they need to be the first vanguards of the destinations. And then also on you guys, on your end, it's spreading the word. You don't need to be a conservationist, right? But you can just care about what's happening and get more advocates to support conservationists such as us and such as the rangers. So that's a simple way to help by advocating and spreading word about it. Hindi mo naman kailangan ikaw yung nasa field, right?
Yes po.
Yes, that's true po. I'm also curious rin po, since honestly, because of social media, there are so-called trends. Sometimes trends pop up na may kinalaman sa nature and conservation. Do you have any suggestion to the listeners, like about metal straws, about,
The
not using
trend.
plastic and all those kinds of stuff?
I'm honestly not the person to talk to when it comes to those things because I'm not naman focusing on waste management. But although, of course, what I would say, as anyone would do, it's really to consume less. It's not about, because, we also have to think of the bigger picture. So let's say plastics. Majority of the Filipinos living below the poverty line can't afford, 'di ba, yung if hindi pa tingi-tingi. So,
Yes.
let's be realistic also. We can't simply say ban it unless merong mga alternatives. So, for those who can, then do the alternatives. Try biodegradable, eco-friendly packages. But at the end of the day, it's also consuming less, living a more minimalistic lifestyle, right? Do you really need to change your clothes every week? Or, di ba, pwede ka namang you have like a set wardrobe lang and that's what you keep repeating. Yung mga ganun ba? Even with, let's say, consuming, di ba? How much do you really consume? When you buy something, do you really need that? Or mabubulok lang ba siya and it will become waste in your room? So, for me, I'm the type na I'm not a perfect environmentalist, but I consume less than what I need.
Yes. Thank you so much, Mom.
Thank
So,
you so much rin po.
before we end po, do you have anything more to say to the listeners or do you have anything to promote?
Yeah, I guess just follow us on Philippine Parks and Biodiversity and Eco Explorations. We're soon launching the restoration platform of Philippine Parks, where we're aggregating all the restoration work all over the Philippines. And if you'd like to support as one of the tree growers, and to support the work that's being done by various NGOs, please stay tuned via our page. And for those who'd like to collaborate on ecotourism, doing tourism right, such as QPL, or other areas, please do let us know.
Thank you so much, Miss Nella.
Sure.
We
Thank you,
shared
guys.
a lot
Mm-mm.
today po.
Thank you rin so much po.
See
It's
you.
it's very breathtaking to know na ang dami palang nagagawa ng mga NGOs.
By God's grace.
Yeah.
Even if
Yeah,
2 years pa lang po, as you mentioned po, it's not like 2 years when you were talking about it po kanina.
I guess because yun din parang even if 2 years pa lang, I was also an explorer first who explored for like the past 10 years. So it came very naturally what we were doing.
All right. So
Sige.
as a thank you then po and appreciation for this opportunity po, no, we would like to present you a certificate of appreciation po.
Mm-hmm.
Certificate of Appreciation. This certificate is proudly presented to Nella Lomotan for sharing her time and knowledge as a guest speaker in Project Kaligkasan, a nature talk of the Philippines podcast, given this 23rd day of April 2021, signed by Group Representative Pauline Lontok and NSTP CWTS Advisor Carl Angelo Caluwag. Thank you po, ma'am.
All right.
You know, Kayla, I've learned a lot from today's discussion talaga on the contribution of NGOs on policies and projects regarding environmental protection. What I really like the most is yung emphasis sa community and how it is very important to engage with your community, either local man or in the national level, for NGOs to be able to implement their projects in environmental protection. So with that, thank you so much, Ms. Lomotan, for being with us today in Project Kaligkasan and sharing your knowledge with us.
This month, the University of the Philippines Association of Biology Majors or UPABM will be launching its donation drive entitled Balik Handog to provide school supplies to scholars from Balara Junior High School. To support our cause, we invite you to join our raffle draw for only 20 pesos per entry and get a chance to be one of 28 winners of vouchers from Clean Canteen. Simply go to tinyurl.com/balikhandog and upload your proof of donation there.
Once again, Project Kaligkasan is in partnership with UP Association of Biology Majors and is brought to you by the Ateneo Environmental Science Society. Thank you for joining us this week on Project Kalig.Kasan, a nature talk of the Philippines. We hope that you picked up valuable lessons from our discussion with Miss Nella Lomotan. Stay tuned next week for another episode. You can't miss out what we have in store as Dr. Lemuel Aragones from the UP Institute of Environmental Science and Meteorology shares with us the role of the academe on Philippine biodiversity and environmental protection.
Also, make sure to visit our Facebook page, projectcalig.casan, for updates and for more information and infographics on our advocacy. While you're at it, you may also check out our podcast on Spotify, YouTube, and Anchor. Hit that like and follow button so that you won't miss any of our upcoming episodes.
Once again, I am Kayla Tiangco.
And I am Zaraya Buena.
And remember, show its worth, save the earth.
Thank you.